This is very interesting, right? Because this is where I think Aristotle here is just like the most interesting. It is, and it's subtle. I think maybe it can be overlooked, but that middle class, that root, the army, all right. What he says is that the best form, the best kind of regime, like this kind of constitutional regime or polity, depending on the translation. I think polity is probably the best, but is one in which they, like you said, they believe themselves to be equals with what we're calling the notables.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And what he says is that if they have participation, they have the ability to participate in the offices of rule, and they feel that they're valued as participants in it, that for the most part they won't want to, right? Like for the most part, because they're not very wealthy, they'll be more concerned about their affairs, and they will not seek to rule, and they'll be content with understanding these notables to basically be the same as them, the same citizens as them, but not really, right? Like so their justice, which is because they're the mass, they're and this is a complicated discussion, but their sense of justice emphasizes the equality aspect of justice, and so you have to, as the ruler, you have to appease that and say we're all equals. All right, we're all the same. And so they believe that to be so. Okay, and then they can be contented by kind of backing away then from the high affairs. Mm-hmm. All right, then so they think the notables are the same as them. Now the notables then can be content because their justice emphasizes superiority. Their sense of justice is the unequal side of justice. Remember, justice is rendering the unequal equal. So it's this like proportionate ordering of things that are unequal to each other, right? So they emphasize the superiority side of the concept of justice, and they're contented because they're receiving all the honors, because they're the ones, they don't see lesser people receiving honors, which is what frustrates them, right? So because they're the ones who are actually ruling, they can be contented. All right. Now they think, just like how the middling class thinks those notables are just one of them, I think this is, I'm somewhat extrapolating here, but I think this is the way this works. They believe the statesman to be one of them. Do you see? Okay, so they, within their mode of justice, they think they're the deliberative force. They're the ones that taught. In a sense, they are the deliberative apparatus. But the ultimate lawgiver is among them, but is actually instrumentalizing them. But they don't, just as the same sort of way that the middle class doesn't perceive that about the notables don't perceive that about the statesmen. And this, and the place where this is most visible is when Aristotle, most obvious is when Aristotle's talking about the tyrant and what the tyrant ought to do, right? If one finds himself in tyranny. Go to that. And the gist of the argument is that he ought to make himself appear to be one of the aristocracy, right? To make himself appear to be their equal.
For people who want to find it, it's around 13, 14, that area where he talks about one mode of preservation for tyrannies then is of this sort. And he goes through, the editor for this book has 34 points of how you can be a tyrant. You can go from being a tyrant to appearing like you're a king, or kind of hiding among the aristocracy. One of kind of that preserve your regime, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're operating in a different mode, right? At a higher level. And so you can engage within the structures and the constitutional form of that which is lower than you. Yes. But then you're instrumentalizing that into for a higher objective, right? And so you can the best way to be a tyrant is actually to stop being one, right? I mean, like
that's where he ends up. He said if you follow this program here, you can be half decent not
not
vicious.
only do you start to
Yeah.
rule as a monarch, but you start to habituate yourself into monarchical type rule, right? So you become aware that the good of these notables is conducive to your own good. The good of the middle classes is conducive to your own good. And so you are working within their senses of justice in order to maximize your own achievement of the good. Right? Now that becomes indistinguishable I think Aristotle's point is if you really figure this out, guys, that becomes indistinguishable from the rule of a king. Right? Like that is in fact the most effective rule, meaning a king is one whose rule is ordered to the good of those underneath him rather than to his own good.